Hello. Today we're going to begin our look at the Clinton administration. Bill Clinton was elected initially in 1992, took office in January of 1993, and left office in January of 2001. So he, spans this bridge into the new millennium. And our learning objectives as we look at this section are to explain the domestic issues that were the focus of Clinton's first term, and to describe the major scandals that marked Clinton's presidency, as well as to list the military engagements during Clinton's presidency and explain the major technological changes during the 1990s. Now, it's kind of hard to talk about Bill Clinton without talking scandal. Many people, I think, mistakenly think that Bill Clinton was impeached because he had an affair. And the truth is, he wasn't impeached for the affair. What he was impeached for was perjury and obstruction of justice. However, it certainly was connected to an alleged affair. Well, actually, more than an alleged affair, it's an affair he's subsequently admitted to. And so we'll be looking at that as we look at the Clinton years. But we'll start off first by looking at the 1992 presidential election. So William Jefferson Clinton was the governor of Arkansas from 1978 through 1992. And he defeated the incumbent George H.W. Bush and H. Ross Perot to win the 1992 presidential election, taking 43% of the popular vote. Obviously, this isn't a majority of the popular vote in terms of he took less than 50%. However, once again, this was an election where we saw a third-party candidate definitely play a major role. H. Ross Perot ran in that election and most likely took votes away from George H.W. Bush. Bush, of course, was running for re-election, as we saw in the previous unit. Right after the Persian Gulf War, Bush's approval rating was at an all-time high, but it sank quickly as the economy slipped into a recession, and then during the election campaign, voters were frequently reminded of how Bush broke his campaign promise of no new taxes, and ultimately that becomes a tremendous liability for him headed into the election of 1992. Like I said, Ross Perot enters this race as kind of a Washington outsider. Ross Perot was a businessman, an entrepreneur who had been very successful, kind of built a reputation as a super patriot, and a lot of people, I think, looked at Ross Perot as someone that I think they thought could potentially make a difference, because he really ran on his own money, wasn't dependent upon campaign contributions. He was kind of a Washington outsider, and so people saw that as a positive. But Ross Perot made a decision pretty early in the campaign where he decided he was going to bow out of the race, and then he re-entered, and he lost a lot of support when he bowed out, and when he came back it was never the same. But he does likely have an impact. He most likely pulled away conservative votes that were likely to go to George H.W. Bush. So looking at reasons why Bush lost the election. At the end of the Gulf War, once again, Bush's approval rating was 80%. Really an unprecedented high. But Bush compromised on a tax increase to close the deficit, breaking a campaign promise, and his approval rating dropped. Then, like I said, Ross Perot, the third-party candidate, and the recession, all of these things really combined to result in a loss for Bush. And Bill Clinton, while there were rumors of scandal, an alleged relationship he had had with a woman named Gennifer Flowers, he was really largely an unknown for most of the country, and I think a lot of people were looking for change. People were unhappy with the direction they felt the country had gone under Bush. They wanted to change, and they were willing to take a risk on Clinton. And so Clinton, I really believe, initially kind of won largely on the protest vote. So Clinton comes in, and really his domestic agenda really is the primary focus. Now, of course, keep in mind, we've gone through the end of the Cold War during the Bush administration. So with that over, we're no longer looking at the world through those Cold War goggles. We look at things much differently now, and we've already dealt with the situation in Iraq. So there was a sense in which that war was won. So Clinton really had a focus on domestic issues, and he focused on the economy, the family, crime, and health care. Also, to reduce the deficit, he raised taxes. In fact, actually put in effect a retroactive tax increase, which wasn't very popular at that point in time. And also to improve the economy, he lowered interest rates, something that many presidents do. Lowering interest rates encourages people to spend. It makes it cheaper for people to borrow money, and thus you hope that people will borrow and spend more. That should stimulate economic activity. As far as crime, Clinton introduced a bill to build new prisons and to put 100,000 new police officers on the streets. He also signed the Brady Bill, named after James Brady, a former White House spokesperson who was shot in the head during the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan, something we talked about in a previous chapter. As far as families, he signed the As far as families, Clinton signed the Family Medical Leave Act in 1993, requiring large employers to allow employees to take unpaid leave for family medical issues. With regards to health care, Clinton appointed the First Lady, Hillary Rodham Clinton, to head a task force to develop a health care plan. Now, of course, a lot of you have become familiar with Hillary Clinton. There's a lot of speculation she may run for president in 2016. She has been previously, under the Obama administration, during Obama's first term, she served as Secretary of State. Prior to that, she was a senator out of New York. So Clinton has had her own active political life as well. But at the time, she was the First Lady, and she's appointed to oversee this commission to try to develop a health care plan. The plan faced opposition from small business owners and insurance companies, not unlike the Affordable Care Act passed in the Obama administration. Similar opponents. Only, with the Affordable Care Act, it passed, but the Health Care Act put together by Hillary Clinton did not. It died before ever coming up for a vote. Then we hit the 1994 midterm elections, and this is always a big deal, right? The midterm elections are those congressional elections that take place right in the middle of a president's term. So they head into the 1994 midterms, and the Republicans gained control of the House of Representatives for the first time since 1954 in these midterms. Newt Gingrich, the leader of the Republican Party, announced the Contract with America, in which the Republicans promised congressional term limits, tax cuts, and government reform. So now we look at our relationship that exists between Clinton and Congress. Clinton allowed the government to shut down when a budget agreement could not be reached, and ultimately the Republicans kind of took the heat on that one. They took the blame, very similar to what's happened in Obama's second term. He did work with Congress, though, to pass the Health Care Portability Act and welfare reform. So, after the new Congress comes in, Clinton kind of recognized that he was going to have to work with the Republicans on the other side of the aisle, and they did actually get quite a bit accomplished between the two through compromise. But also, there were numerous scandals. Some of these scandals predated Clinton's presidency and kind of followed him into the White House. One of the many scandals was known as Whitewater, and Clinton was believed to have arranged illegal loans for a land deal while he was the governor of Arkansas. Attorney General Janet Reno appointed Kenneth Starr as the independent counsel to investigate Whitewater. Now, this becomes important because while he starts investigating the Whitewater scandal, ultimately he bridges out from that investigation in what largely was kind of a Republican witch hunt. In a lot of ways, they were really looking to try to bring Clinton down. Unfortunately, though, with Clinton, where there was smoke, there was fire. As they began, looking more into these scandals, they found more. And so we'll continue to look at other scandals that he had. In 1994, a woman named Paula Jones filed a lawsuit against Clinton for sexual harassment, stemming back to when he was the Arkansas governor. And Clinton attempted to have the trial postponed until after he left office. The Supreme Court ruled against Clinton, and the case was eventually settled out of court. So, and of course, a lot of times that happens with court cases. When there is a lawsuit, they'll reach some type of agreement satisfactory to both parties to avoid actually going through the process. So, and that's what happened with the Paula Jones lawsuit. So it ends up being settled, but it once again has a tie-in into Clinton's impeachment. Then we head into the 1996 presidential election. Clinton defeated Republican Bob Dole and Reform Party candidate Ross Perot, taking 49.2% of the popular vote. So still, he's elected with less than 50% of the popular vote, but this time takes a much larger percentage than he had the first time. Ross Perot made a little less of a dent in the 1996 election than he had in 92. And Bob Dole, once again, is the Republican candidate, ultimately wasn't able to win this election. So Clinton really remained pretty popular. He claimed credit for the strong economy, which had its longest period of growth in history, or in the history of the United States. And unemployment and inflation were at their lowest point in 40 years. So at this point in time, a lot is looking good. Clinton's able to claim credit for it. Certainly, the Republicans in Congress were trying to claim credit as well. Ultimately, they both did work together on things, so both could claim some credit, but Clinton got most of the credit. Shortly after he's elected is when the Monica Lewinsky scandal breaks. Allegations that Clinton had an affair with a 22-year-old White House intern named Monica Lewinsky surfaced in 1997, just after he starts his second term. And during the Paula Jones lawsuit, Clinton had been asked about his relationship with Lewinsky, and he denied having sexual relations with her. Later, it would come out that he did have sexual relations with her, and that, of course, when you lie under oath, that is called perjury. Now, he wasn't testifying in a criminal hearing, but that didn't really matter. He's testifying in a civil lawsuit. He's asked direct questions about his relationship, and he denies a sexual relationship. Now, something else that some people mistakenly think that he was impeached for lying to the public. Well, that's not a crime to lie to the public. He wasn't impeached for lying to the public, although he did do that. But really, it stems back from that deposition that he gave in the Paula Jones lawsuit. He lied there, and that's where he committed perjury. So this leads to impeachment. Kenneth Starr expanded his Whitewater investigation into whether or not Clinton had committed perjury, which once again is lying under oath, and whether or not he had obstructed justice. And so ultimately, the investigation kind of turns up that he may have asked some other people possibly to lie about his relationship with Lewinsky, thus obstruction of justice. The justice obstructed would have been the justice that Paula Jones was seeking. She had filed the lawsuit. Yes, it was settled out of court, but he hadn't given truthful information during the course of the lawsuit. That may have obstructed her right to obtain justice. Therefore, that is a crime, particularly for him as the president to have committed this crime. So ultimately, the House of Representatives has to bring impeachment charges. That's the way the impeachment process works. With Richard Nixon, a lot of people mistakenly think Nixon was impeached. Nixon actually resigned, but he was facing impeachment and a likely conviction in the Senate. In the case of Clinton doesn't resign. He faces the impeachment charges in the House of Representatives, and the impeachment passes. So Clinton becomes the second president in U.S. history to be impeached. However, they're still not at the point of removal. It has to then go to the Senate for a trial. They fell short of the 2/3 majority needed for a conviction. So ultimately, even though Clinton was impeached, Clinton was not removed from office. He was able to finish out his second term. And once again, what he was impeached for was the idea that he had lied in the Paula Jones deposition, and that he had somehow tried to obstruct justice. So now we're going to take a look at the foreign affairs under the Clinton administration. There were numerous military entanglements during Clinton's 2 terms to despite the end of the Cold War. And we'll start with an incident that simply became known as, more commonly as Black Hawk Down. That also becomes the inspiration of a book. The book becomes the inspiration for a well-known Hollywood movie titled Black Hawk Down. But it was also known as the Battle of Mogadishu. And so what happened is between October 3rd and 4th, 1993, in Mogadishu, Somalia, U.S. forces fought against Somali militia fighters. Now, they went in basically to take out a warlord known as Mohammed Farah Aidid, and ultimately they end up engaging in a street battle. 2 U.S. Black Hawk helicopters are shot down by rocket-propelled grenades, leaving soldiers trapped behind enemy lines. They have to try to fight their way out. This results in a big urban battle that killed 18 American soldiers and wounded 73 others. Some of the American soldiers, their bodies were dragged through the streets. The whole thing becomes quite a fiasco, and it really makes many Americans fearful of committing our troops into any other foreign entanglements. But there were more. Another one was Bosnia. Ethnic conflict in Bosnia led the U.S. and NATO to hit Bosnian Serb targets. Clinton sent a U.S. peacekeeping force to Bosnia in 1995 to uphold the Dayton Accords. And we also had entanglements in Afghanistan and Sudan in response to al-Qaeda bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Clinton ordered missile strikes against suspected terrorist targets in Afghanistan and Sudan. Now, it just so happens that right about the same time that a lot of this was coming forth, we also had the Clinton scandal was taking place, and there were some critics who suggested that this may be what they call a wag the dog scenario, where possibly Clinton was trying to build some kind of fake crisis to divert attention away from his own scandals. And possibly that may have played a role in the fact that we really didn't go after Osama bin Laden as aggressively as we could have in the Clinton years. Clinton kind of scaled things back. But by this point in time, bin Laden's really becoming enemy number one. He already had tried to carry out a bombing of the World Trade Center during the Clinton administration. That one really largely failed, although they did have an explosion in an underground garage beneath one of the Twin Towers, and it did do some damage, and it was very minor by comparison to the September 11th attacks, but once again it did kind of catch our attention. Obviously these embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania also catch our attention. We also were involved once again in Yugoslavia, kind of related to the Bosnia conflict as well, to stop ethnic cleansing, which is basically genocide against Albanians by Serbians. Clinton authorized U.S. support for NATO bombing campaigns in Kosovo. Then Iraq. Iraq kind of, even though we went there, we drove Saddam Hussein's forces out of Iraq, we continued to have very tense relations with the administration of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. He continued to violate the UN resolutions that ended the war, including sending soldiers into sending planes up in no-fly zones where he wasn't supposed to. He eventually started kicking out UN weapons inspectors. There was widespread belief that he was trying to develop nuclear weapons. So in the 1998 State of the Union address, Clinton mentioned that Saddam Hussein was trying to develop nuclear weapons. Clinton ordered airstrikes against Iraqi targets in the no-fly zone. And for the last 2 years of Clinton's presidency, we routinely hit targets in the no-fly zone. Now, of course, this is all all taking place prior to the administration of George W. Bush, who would take office in 2001, and ultimately, under his leadership, we would go back to war in Iraq in 2003. So there had been some buildup, though, like I said, during the Clinton administration. Also, in terms of Clinton's foreign policy, he became really the first president to visit Vietnam since the end of the Vietnam War. And this happens in November of 2000, also same month as the 2000 presidential election. So really does this right towards the tail end of his presidency. Overall, Clinton remained very popular, but the Lewinsky scandal did cost him credibility. And as he was preparing to leave office, his vice president, Al Gore, was running for president in the 2000 election against George W. Bush, the son of Clinton's predecessor. We also entered into what becomes known as the information age during the Clinton years. Technological advances made communication easier and increased access to information, particularly through the use of computers. Once again, the first computer, ENIAC, was created in 1946. The integrated circuit was created in 1959 by Robert Noyce, and it placed a complete electronic circuit on a single chip made of silicon. Many computer companies located south of San Francisco in what would become known as the Silicon Valley. In 1968, Noyce and Gordon Moore formed Intel, a company that makes microprocessors, which have further reduced the size and increased the speed of computers. And of course, Intel has really become kind of the leader in processors. Even MacBooks made by Apple now contain Intel processors, and many PCs are Intel based. And then typically what has happened for years is Intel, every time they would come out with a new higher speed processor, one of the other manufacturers would come out with their version. But Intel really has become the industry leader. In 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak founded Apple Computer, and intense competition in the computer industry followed. As we mentioned, personal computers, or PCs, came into popularity, and really the first personal computer was published by International Business Machines, or IBM, back in 1981. Now, after that, for a long time, a lot of people tended to refer to PCs as IBM compatibles. Apple responded in 1984 with the Apple II, which used on-screen graphics called icons. Now, of course, we've become very familiar with that. Windows uses on-screen icons as well, but Apple was the first really to pioneer the on-screen icons. So Bill Gates founded Microsoft, which made software for PCs. And in 1985, Windows was introduced as an operating system for PCs that used on-screen graphics or icons. So kind of following Apple's model. And of course, Microsoft has become very strong, a very strong company. And in fact, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs later would kind of collaborate on some things. Something else that became very possible thanks to these advanced computer technologies was telecommuting. By the late 1990s, telecommuting was becoming common. The use of computer networks and email made it possible for people to work from home and communicate with their office, such as exchange files and communications, etc. Once again, the internet, originally designed for the U.S. Defense Department, the framework for the internet began developing in the late 1950s and continued throughout the 1960s. The internet became available for commercial interest in 1988. Since then, it has expanded tremendously and had an estimated 1.6 billion users in 2009. Now, of course, as I'm recording this, it's now 2014, so that was already 5 years ago. It continues to become much more used and available. most spots in the world now are connected via the internet and can communicate in real time. Dot-coms. Between 1995 and the year 2000, many different internet-based businesses flourished, experiencing tremendous growth. This kind of becomes known as the dot-coms, but led into what became known as the dot-com bubble. Many of those businesses did end up going belly up in the early 2000s. Some of them, of course, survived. Some have become very strong. Other advances in technology include biotechnology. Expanded rapidly in the 1990s. This technology is being used to develop new medicines, animal growth hormones, and genetically engineered plants. The Human Genome Project is the project to map the gene sequence of humans, and that started in 1990. They've made tremendous progress with that and continue to develop new genetic technologies, even gene therapy, to try to address sometimes genetic disorders. We also began to really see more and more what's become a global economy. The development of the internet during the 1990s led to the integration of the global economy. In some ways, technology has hindered the economy in the U.S. as we've shifted now more into the service sector, which means we have less manufacturing jobs, but more jobs provided in the service sector, which is hard to export. In the new global economy, the U.S. is experiencing trade deficits, meaning that we are importing more than we are exporting. And of course, that ties into the fact that we're now part of the service sector for the most part. Service jobs are hard to export. For example, someone that provides a service for you, we can't really provide that service usually over long distances. Something like a service like janitorial work, for example. You can send the janitors to another country, but you can't do janitorial work remotely from a long distance. There's not a finished product that you can export. Teaching. Technology enables some teaching to be done over the internet. For example, you're watching this video on the internet, but teaching can be done face-to-face, and you cannot export a face-to-face teaching experience to another country. Many things in the service sector really work that way. However, with actual physically manufactured products, those can be manufactured here and exported to other countries. But we've moved away from that, and so now we're importing a lot of goods that are manufactured elsewhere while not being able to export the services that are produced here. And that's helped add to this trade imbalance that we have. Another issue that the world looks at right now is free trade. The current trend in the world is moving more towards free trade. The European Union includes most European countries and promotes free trade and a common currency, the euro. NAFTA, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, was signed in 1994, and that's a trade agreement that was developed to promote free trade amongst the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The World Trade Organization promotes free trade, administers trade agreements, and settles trade disputes. American supporters of the WTO say that consumers will benefit from lower prices, while critics say that it gives too much power to the poorer nations. China. China has had an increasing role in international trade. Clinton negotiated a new trade agreement with China in October of 2000 despite much opposition. China also currently owns much of our national debt. Other global issues: terrorism, nuclear proliferation or the spread of nuclear weapons, and global warming. These all remain really hot button issues. And related to global warming, in 1997, an international meeting was held in Kyoto, Japan, to discuss the reduction of greenhouse gases. 38 nations signed the Kyoto Protocol, including the United States, but the U.S. withdrew from the treaty in 2001, fearing it would hurt the American economy.